did your experiences at CISA now, not at Northwestern, shape how you saw the city? Because you were from the Valley. You weren't from the elite West Side and Pasadena. You know what I mean?
In those days, again, use a foreign term, all reporters kept Thomas Brothers map books in their car because you didn't have GPS and cell phones. But I was a real Valley kid. When I was 12 years old, I'd take the bus to the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, but Hollywood was just, I'd never been to downtown, I don't think, until I applied for the job. There was no reason for a Valley kid to go. I was too young. And the Music Center was built in the late 60s, so as a young adult, I then, of course, went to the Music Center. But I had no reason to go to L.A. I had no reason. I didn't have any family who lived in the West Side. Had an aunt who lived in Pasadena. So when I was a kid, family would drive there, but I didn't know the San Gabriel Valley. South Bay? You went to Marineland maybe once every couple years, something else that doesn't exist. So I had to sort of learn the city on the fly, just as I guess a reporter who came from another city would have to. But, I really credit my CSUN journalism education for being offered the job at the Times. I was hard-charging. They'd say, anybody want to work some overtime? My hand shot up. I'd work weekends if they needed it. I was always coming up with feature stories, and the foundational skills that I learned in the classroom and from the Sundial, I absolutely credit to giving me what it took to do the job. When I was an intern, there were 3 other interns in the newsroom, one from Yale, one from Harvard, and one from Berkeley. And I was the only one offered a job. And I could never quite figure out why, with the sorts of pedigrees that they had, why I was the one. But I attribute it to the fact that I was hungry. I had the passion for journalism. And I think it just made all the difference in the world.
You're an alum of California State University, Northridge, and Fernando Valley State College. Not all alum choose to remain connected to their alma mater, and not just because the wife works there. You have chosen to give back to the university over the past decades, plural. Why?
The journalism department, I guess it was the College of Arts.
It was Arts, Media, and Communication before it became the Crab College.
Arts, Media, and Communication, a number of years ago, decided to put up a wall where you could buy a plaque, and you made a donation. And the largest plaque, like 5 by 7, was $1,000. And so we said, well, we'll buy a plaque. And they said, well, what do you want to put on it? And we thought about that. And one day I went to Cynthia and I said, I know what we should put on it. And it says, Bob and Cynthia Rawitch, CSUN changed our lives. She was a reporter at the Associated Press on maternity leave when she began the first of 43 years at the university as a part-time journalism teacher. I started teaching part-time in 1969, one class a semester. And that phrase answers the question. I really believe the overall, not just the journalism, but the overall education that I got here put me on the path for what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So she, of course, was a part-time professor, then full-time, then an administrator. I was teaching part-time. We're educating 3 kids. We'd give a little money here and there. But in subsequent years, as we became more financially fixed and all, we tried to accordingly increase our financial contributions. And then one day, Blenda Wilson, when she was president, called me up and said, "Would you have lunch with me?" And I said, "Sure." And she invited me to join the foundation board. So I spent 15 years on the foundation board until term limits kicked me off. And one day somebody, Tom McCarran, called and said, "Would you join the University Corporation?" So I spent 16 years in the University Corporation. And then I can't remember which dean called me and said, "Would you join the Dean's Council of Arts, Media, and Communication?" Sure. So I joke and I say, I don't know how to say no to CSUN because CSUN changed our lives.
Through your teaching, through your time as a student, how have you seen the student body change in those 60 years?
There's two things that I would say remain in common. It is student-centered with faculty who care about teaching and know how to do it and do it well. And it was and continues to be a superior place for first-generation college students. In my day, it was first-generation white students. Today, as we know, it's largely first-generation Latino and other students of color. And it reflects the exact opposite of what it was when I was a kid. The Valley is this extraordinarily diverse community. Asian American, Native American, Black, Latino, white, and they all come together here at CSUN. I thought of it, as a matter of fact, last week. My youngest granddaughter graduated from nursery school, and we went to her graduation of 23 students. I didn't pay attention to the ethnic percentages, and I don't know for a fact if there was a Native American student there, but every other ethnicity was represented in her little private nursery school at a Presbyterian church, because that's what the San Fernando Valley is.
Do you like CSUN? What it's become?
Oh, absolutely. I would still be teaching part-time, except I don't feel qualified to teach journalism anymore. It's changed so much. I stopped teaching when it was necessary to educate the students more about the role of social media. I didn't want to teach people how to be on Facebook and to tweet and what rules or non-rules there are for such things. I mean, that's several generations before me. I thought other people could do it better, and so I stopped teaching. But CSUN and an organization called MEND are two institutions that we give our largest donations to and give our most time to, because of the role that both of them play in the San Fernando Valley.
I take it you're proud of your alma mater.
Yeah, I am.
What do you tell? I mean, you worked your way up at the LA Times to become to have an important role in which you helped shape news and shape coverage. And to go back a million years, when I'm the first generation of my family to go to college, my mother's side. There's no question. My mother barely made it to high school and did not finish high school. And last night I had this revelatory idea that never occurred to me. She dropped out of high school when she was 14. Because you think, oh, she dropped out when she was in ninth grade. You forget what age one is when they're in ninth grade. And I applied to 4 universities, got into 2. One was Princeton. The other was USC. And why did I go to USC? Because it had a journalism program. I mean, I knew I was going to be a journalist since I was 8 years old. There was no question. That's what I was going to be. I pondered what would my life be like. I had chosen Princeton, but USC was smarter. They offered me a financial aid package for 4 years. Princeton did not know how to deal with first-generation college students, and they only offered me a package for 1 year. I was not smart enough to realize financial aid gets renewed every year. But I think about those going into journalism, and it pays so little. But our experiences, our voices, you coming from an impoverished background, a background of not having, same as I do, our perspectives were refreshing in that environment. I mean, you said your competition were Yale and Harvard and Berkeley. Do you think with the Valley, with CSUN's demographic changing, at least in your major, not the minor, that the voices of our students are just as important given their perspectives, or if not more?
Unquestionably. In fact, I just got an email 2 weeks ago, I guess, from one of the folks in the journalism department saying a journalism grad had just joined KNBC locally. 2 of the anchors at KNBC are journalism graduates who are Latinos. The journalism department has strong ties with all the media. Our graduates who are predominantly Latinos in journalism are going into every facet of the media. Online, public relations, broadcasting, not many in newspapers anymore. There aren't a lot of jobs, but they're in every phase of the media. And as society diversifies, let me rephrase that. As society accepts diversification more fully, because there still is resistance in any number of quarters to that, we will become, in my judgment, a better society because we will be reflective of the broader society. Let me mention 2 programs, knowing you're going to edit and they may or may not fit, but that play off of that, and which I'm particularly proud of. When I was an assistant metropolitan editor, my first editing job, I complained politely about the lack of reporters of color in the newsroom. And one summer, the metropolitan editor called me in and said, "Okay, Big Mouth, you complained about," he didn't say people of color, of course, in those days, "the lack of minorities in the newsroom. I want you to take the summer off, spend it recruiting professionals from around the country to come to the Times." Spent 3 months. I went to about a dozen different metropolitan cities. On the sly, tried to steal seasoned reporters to come to the Times. But when I came back from that trip, I also concluded there were not a lot of ethnic minorities in journalism programs. There were certainly not a lot in the media. It was about 4% then. Fortunately, it has not significantly grown in the ensuing years. I think it's 10 or 12% now. But I wrote a memo proposing that the Times start a minority training program, which I call the Minority Editorial Training Program. It was going to be a 2-year training program, summer in a classroom setting and the rest of the time in the newsroom. Long story short, The paper adopted it. This month, actually, it is 40 years old. It has produced more than 400 reporters, copy editors of color, photographers as well. And it's probably the proudest single accomplishment that I consider I had as an editor at the paper. When I became a senior editor at the paper in a hiring position, I increased. I had a staff of about 130, I guess, at its peak, and it was close to 40% female and 1/3 minority, which was 8-9 times more than the rest of the paper at large. Maybe it goes back to that question of empathy and a belief in diversity broadly. But a lot of people talk about it. When I had an opportunity to do something about it, I tried to do it.
I had friends who went through that program.
I'm sure you do.
When I was interning, I remember that, just to go back to the days when I was at USC and looking for internships and stuff, Ed Cray taught at SC at the time, and I went to school with his daughter, Jennifer, and her husband, Mark, who was my editor at the Daily Trojan. I remember Ed came into the Daily Trojan one day. I don't think I had Ed Cray as professor. I had Joe Saltzman as opposed to Ed Cray. And, but I knew him. And he came into the Daily Trojan and gathered a bunch of us. Remember, I was at USC, so there were not very many of us of color. And I didn't know why we weren't taking internships at the LA Times. And I said, because you don't pay. I can't afford. The idea that you had an internship at the LA Times was prestigious enough to make up for the fact that you didn't get paid. I worked in the Pasadena Star-News. They paid me. And they couldn't understand why people of color did not want to work at the LA Times as an intern.
I will share with you, not a matter of boasting, but when I became assistant metropolitan editor, and we were not paying academic interns, I went in to the metropolitan editor and I said, one of the reasons we don't get any minority interns? Because they can't afford to work for free. They're got a part-time job in a hamburger place or whatever else to help pay the bills. And modest as it was, I was the one who got interns to be paid minimum wage at the LA Times as academic interns. I have to tell you one other story just to keep you humble about USC.
Believe me, I am.
In my very first semester, my best high school friend who was on the high school paper with me was at USC. And I went down to have lunch with him one day. And he said, let me introduce you to one of my professors here. His name is Fred Coonrad. And I sat down and started chatting with him. And out of nowhere, he says, well, why don't you transfer to USC? I can get you a half-time scholarship. Well, I was floored. But I said, well, let me think about it. And I went back, and my advisor at the time here at Valley State was a professor named Ken Duvall. And Ken was getting his doctorate at the time at USC. And I told him of this. And he said, let me tell you a story, Bob. He said, USC is the 800-pound gorilla of journalism and PR in town. And he said, when you graduate, if you're a USC graduate and you're being interviewed by a USC alum, the fact that your alum may give you a heads up, you may get that job. But you're still going to have to be able to do the work. If you stay here, I guarantee you, when you graduate, you'll be prepared to do the work. Well, that lecture and the fact that there was no way I was going to come up with the other half of the tuition anyway made me stay at CSUN, and I've never, ever regretted it.
I never heard of CSUN when I was looking in colleges. No one did. That was before active recruitment took part. So all I did was look up with the journalism program, and I was in the San Gabriel Valley. So USC seemed the option. I didn't know where the San Fernando Valley was, except that's where the Sylmar earthquake was. My grandfather had worked at the lab in Sylmar.
Yep.
And that was it. Anything else you want to add? We've been talking for almost an hour.
I know I took lots of notes, which we haven't touched on, which is perfectly fine. It had to do with kind of what went on campus in those years. Some of we touched upon student activism and all, but no, I mean, first of all, you covered so much anyway, and you're going to have to cut it down. I mean, if there's something specific.
I'm curious. One of the things I'm curious about is commencement. Do you remember your commencement?
Oh, absolutely.
And? Who was your speaker? What happened?
I don't remember who the speaker was. I have been to many, many commencements since then and know how rowdy, particularly the College of Arts, Media, and Communications commencements can be. There was no way I couldn't go. My parents, of course, wanted to be proud. My brother, who went to Pierce because it was free, and then went to UCLA, got his BA, and then got his doctorate from there, graduated before me, and he and I are the only ones of our generation who did graduate from college. I just remember what a proud day it was. It was obviously much smaller. The journalism class consisted of, I think, 18 or 20 of us, because the department was small. There were only, there were 3 professors in the department when I started and 4 when I graduated.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was such an intimate thing. At the beginning of the summer, the professors would rotate and they'd have a barbecue at their house for the students to come to. When you became of age after class, you'd go out and drink with the professors at the White Horse Inn, or there was some place on Reseda that we used to go to have a beer. It was just a very family-like environment.
What a sharp contrast from 36,000 students and 11,000 students graduating. That's how many we had graduate.
Yeah. In fact, I did look it up. There were, as I said, 10,000 when I started, and there were about 12,000 when I graduated. They actually had a year where, because of a budget shortfall, they had to freeze admissions. Otherwise, it would have grown more because it was just growing by leaps and bounds.
What was it like to attend a young college? It was so new. I mean, you guys were establishing the traditions.
I don't think we thought about it. I mean, it does remind me during that period, and again, in contrast to what the university is today, when I went back and looked through the Sundial, there were stories about the temporary university building, the tub, which preceded the student union. And they had on the drawing boards the student union, and as students, we assessed ourselves a $2 a semester fee to go into the fund to build the student union that was going to be, 5-7 years down the line with state money. I can never be on campus, not hear the carillons, and know they took up a collection, and the class gift from our graduating class was the carillons that today ring out the hour and the quarter hour, etc. I don't think I knew what a carillon was back then, but they said that's what it was going to do. I don't remember how much we I donated or how much they cost. But, I mean, I guess those were things that made you realize this is the very early stages of a university. But when you're 18 to 22 years old, you're not thinking of what's going to be 10 or 20 years later about the institution. You're thinking about where am I going to work? Where am I going to get a job? Will I marry? Will I have kids? Those kinds of things.
Question. Devonshire Downs, was it an operation while you were a student here?
Oh, well, yes, the state fair was still in Devonshire Downs then. And in fact, it's one of the other little things I found. Devonshire Downs became a part of the campus, give me a second, I think in 1966 or 67. Yeah, 67. It became CSUN property, and there was talk about there would be dorms there. I mean, all this blue sky stuff. Nobody envisioned a medical complex being leased on any of it. But yeah, when I was still a student, the Devonshire Downs had the annual San Fernando Valley Fair there. The other thing we did, it's always interesting, when I think back to my parents and their memories, and I would contrast them to mine and now mine with my kids or my grandkids, the student journalism group called then Sigma Delta Chi, the Society of Professional Journalists, we used to produce the programs for the basketball and the football games, and we'd go through the stands and sell them for $0.25 a piece. And that was the fundraiser for whatever we needed funds for at the time. One other memory that I think, again, you just don't know better. The very first year to enroll for classes, I went to what is now the Matadome. Mm-hmm. And it was just called the CSUN Gym. And on the bleachers, there was a sign to say journalism, English, history, and a professor sitting there, and you'd say, I'd like to take the history of journalism. And they'd give you an index card, number 2. Okay, you got it. And they'd write it down. And that's how we registered for classes. The next year, same system, but we moved to Sierra Hall, which had been built. But I can't walk into the Matadome, where we are season basketball ticket holders, and not think back to going up those bleachers to get my English course.
Wow. I don't think people realize we take CSUN for granted now. It's an institution. But we also take its academic programs for granted. Whether you're an alum or you live in LA, because CSUN's now known in LA. It is an LA institution, just like USC and UCLA. We take for granted its academics, its programs, its colleges. I don't think people realize how many matadors are sitting in newsrooms across the country, but particularly in Southern California, and how many more of those people making decisions and reporting in those newsrooms are matadors.
Well, you know this, but CNBC had the power trio who all went to school together, Bill Griffith, Sue Herrera, and Ron Insana, who were on national TV. And Bill, again, is a proud alum. But I was going to go someplace different with what you're saying in terms of not knowing. When I became the editor of the Valley Twice a Week section, mm-hmm. One of the very first stories we had during my tenure, and not because of me, it just was coincidental, was that the CSUN Music Department was rated one of the 10 top ones in the country. And now, of course, CTVA is one of in the film programs, they're in the top 20 in the country, and people and people within the industry know those things. But there are so many academically distinguished programs at the university that the industries know about, the people in the San Fernando Valley do not. And I guess if you're not an engineer, you wouldn't be expected to know anything about the engineering program here, as an example, or the business school, which at one point had, I think they were the managing directors of the top 3 accounting firms in Los Angeles.
Highest pass rate on the CPA exam of any institution of higher learning in California.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, you know far more of these accolades than I do. And the brag points you guys put out, I use them all the time, and they're just great. You need to do, the university needs to do a better job of somehow getting the San Fernando Valley population to appreciate those, as opposed to it just being, yeah, it's a really good university in the northwest end of the valley my kids can go to. Once people look into specific disciplines, oh, I didn't know that, sort of is the reaction. So, but we're preaching to the converted.